or I mentioned Bill and what a great guy he was. And so I do think that this is a good time to expand on that a little bit.
Okay.
Um, and it just happened that the year that I entered Concord High School, the math department had decided to switch geometry and algebra, um, which both came along in the sophomore and junior years. And so I was taking algebra along with a group of juniors. Um, I and some of my classmates and a bunch of juniors were taking algebra together, and um, I was sitting at my desk in this class when others were coming in, and this young man came in, and I'm sure that my eyeballs popped open. He was just absolutely the best looking thing. And he happened to be just in front of one of my brother's closest friends. So of course that evening I was on the telephone to my brother's closest friends trying to find out who this guy was, and he said it was Bill Anderson, and I said, oh, I don't think so. I think um, I said, I think Bill Anderson's blonde. And he said, no, you're thinking of his brother. I guess at some point somebody had pointed out David and told me it was Bill. They were wrong. Anyway, it was all straightened out, um, and I guess Pep picked up on the fact that I was interested, and several, maybe a week or so later, the telephone rang, and I answered, and this voice said, would you like to go to the movies on Saturday night? Well, I didn't know who I was talking to, and I said, who is this, please? And the person on the other end of the line repeated the question, would you like to go to the movies on Saturday night? And I must have either hesitated or repeated my question, because Pep, who was sitting there, grabbed the phone from him and said, for God's sake, woman, Bill, this is Bill Anderson on the telephone. Would you give him a straight answer? Well, of course I said, sure, fine. I'm happy to go to the movies with you on Saturday night. And I think the conversation ended there. And so sure enough, on Saturday night, Bill showed up at the door and was properly introduced to my parents, and we went off to the movies. And I know that we saw John Hall and the woman who used to wear a sarong back in those days. Her name had just popped out of my mind, but in any case, and it was a double feature, and it was at the Embassy Theater in Waltham, Massachusetts, and I jabbered all the way to the theater, and I jabbered all the way back, and Bill didn't, as far as I was concerned, said nothing. So the next morning when I showed up for breakfast, this was a Sunday morning, my mother said, what's the matter with you? You look as if you've been crying all night. And I said, well, I was crying. I said, he didn't say a word to me all night long, and I did nothing but just talk my stupid head off. And so so I was miserable. And I was miserable up until about Wednesday or Thursday of the week, when he called up one more time and said, would you like to go to the movies? So I decided that that was the terms of our relationship. I would do all the talking, and he would do all of the non-talking. And it got easier as we became more and more used to one another. He did start to do something more than just grunt. And we dated steadily all of that school year. And then when the summer came along, I had been invited to Canada to visit the Forsyth family, who had a gorgeous summer home up in one of the Great Lakes in Ontario, and had an absolutely blast all summer long. and didn't write a letter to anybody. And I think this perhaps upset Bill. I don't know exactly what it was. I think that was it, though, because when I arrived back home, and the first day of high school, I learned very quickly there were any number of friends and non-friends that wanted to tell me that he was now dating another girl, Ann Hills, who lived in the same town, who also lived in Lincoln. And I was shattered, needless to say. I realized that I hadn't written to him all summer long, and I figured that was part of the problem. And as it turned out, eventually that was part of the problem, or that was the problem. And he had funny little ways. Shy as he was, he had funny little ways of taunting me that year. He put something into the school newspaper, a sort of a faux gossip column, in which it was said that Mary Richardson, had become quite a skier, just going steadily downhill all year long, which was nasty. And he also plunked an arrow into our front door. My mother assured me that if he was going to pay that kind of attention to me, even if it was negative attention, that he was probably still interested, but I didn't believe her. And then all of a sudden he called me up one day and we started dating again. And so then we dated all the way through the first half of his senior year. And is this right? Oh my God. Anyway, we had another split up, and then I was taking some summer courses at Boston University. One summer when he happened to be home on leave, and I guess he found out I was nearby, and he called up for a date, and all of a sudden we were back together again, and so after that I was back down in Washington with my family. I had been up at BU taking courses, and at that point, I started to work for the Bureau of Standards, doing ionosphere predictions, and Bill was stationed in North Carolina, so he managed to get up to Washington periodically, and then he got stationed in New York, and I got to New York a couple of times. And it was while we were in New York that he decided the time had come for us to get married. And I think that was in early spring or maybe late winter 1945. And so we got married in May of 1945, and the war ended. We were married. I was pregnant. Yes, I was pregnant. And so we stayed in the service another 4 or 5 months, and then we came back to Concord. At that point, I was 3 or 4 months pregnant with Kenneth, and Bill started to take classes at Boston University, pending the next year, starting in September at the University of what was then Mass State. Eventually, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and so in September we went up to Amherst, and Kenneth was born, and not long after that, Bill started along. One of the funny stories about that one was the time that I came down with with a pretty serious case of flu, and we were living in a little small veterans apartment. We had a big living room and a dining room kitchen facility and one bedroom, and in the bedroom we had one twin. The bedroom was came with two twin beds, but we got rid of one of the twin beds because we needed a crib for Ken. So the three of us slept in this room. And one time when I was very sick with flu, and back in the days when doctors actually came to see you at home, the doctor came over and to see me, and he sat down on the edge of the bed and he looked around a little bit, and he said, "You sleep here?" And I said, "Yes." And the baby sleeps there, and I said, "Yes." And he said, "Where does your husband sleep?" And I said, "He sleeps here too." And he said, "Well," he said, "I don't understand why you're confused about the fact that you're pregnant." Which was altogether too true. Anyway, so Bill was taking pictures around campus at all the events, dances, fraternity parties, anything he thought would drum up business. And he loved it. And finally, at the end of the year, he said, "We're not coming back." He said, "I'm going to go and open up a photo studio in Concord." And he had spoken to his parents, and they were willing for us to come home. And that's how the photo business started. And I guess that was the year 1947. We lived for a while with Bill's parents, which was a wonderful place to live, gorgeous farm. And the house that Bill's father's family had owned since the 1890s, there were two sides to the house, and one of the rentals opened up, and that's where we moved in, and that's where we stayed for the next, let's see, that was we stayed there for until Bill died, and for another 5 or 6 years after that. So we must have been there for about 50 odd years. It's a great